Good evening everybody and welcome to the second game in a busy week for Sheffield United. You might have noticed the not insignificant matter of a local derby against our friends and neighbours the Millers at Bramall Lane on Saturday. Club that I've always had a soft spot for, Rotherham, to be honest. Growing up in the sort of Hackneythorpe, Handsworth sides of Sheffield, on the rare occasions when we didn't have a game. To be honest with you, particularly at Handsworth, Rotherham probably nearer than Bramall Lane in a lot of respects. So we used to sort of sidle along occasionally and watch Rotherham in the 80s. Saw some great players there, and of course down the years been some great games between the two clubs, and also a lot of players have sort of shared the colours of the shirts, as it were. Many players in my age, you remember that thundering goal that Bob Adkins scored. Ferrara was there when the wall collapsed at Millmoor. And I always think of when you went to Millmoor, which was a lovely, tight little ground, great ground to go to. When you turned down Millmoor Lane, as it used to be, to go to the away end, how tight it was. And I remember going down there, being quite young, about 13, 14, maybe even a bit younger, and actually feeling it had been lifted up with the pressure of people, all sort of crushing down that little tight road at the back to get into the away end. One of the most scared I've ever been at a football match, I think, that, thinking back. Over the years, as we said, quite a few players have come the other way, and managers as well. Back in the day, in the 1950s, manager took over from Teddy Davis at Sheffield United. Reg Freeman came from Millmoor to Bramall Lane to take the manager's hot seat and did a good job, well liked by the players. An old school manager, played for Middlesbrough when he was a football player. And he won the second division championship as manager. Some great players at United like Jimmy Hagan, Joe Shaw, Alf Ringstead, Lane legends. Died in office at Sheffield United quite suddenly over the summer, I think, 1955, and replaced by Joe Mercer for his spell at Sheffield United as manager. One of the first club managers here that made a big impression on me, as I was getting a bit older and understanding football and the Blades a bit better, was when, of course, we went and poached Ian Porterfield from Millmoor. Ian had just taken Rotherham up to the old second division, and we were in the fourth. And he decided Sheffield United was the better bet and came here and sort of rewrote history. Certainly winning the fourth division championship, and then taking his promotion again a short while later back to the second division. And certainly in his earlier spells at Sheffield United, Ian Porterfield did a hell of a job. But players followed him. Big favourite of mine at that time, and one that's always fondly remembered and welcomed home by the Blades. Paul Sutcliffe. Stan was here the other game across with Tony Curry having a meal. We try and get him across a couple of times a season. He's working still in football at Doncaster. Stan was a big favourite. But I wanted to go back a bit further than that for the player I wanted to talk about today that sort of graced Rotherham and Sheffield United and sort of played a part in history for us. And he was a player called Charlie Sutcliffe. Now, Charlie Sutcliffe's quite an interesting character. He was a goalkeeper. And he was the brother of a player that played international football and rugby for England. Of course, his name was Sutcliffe. Can't remember his Christian name. But he sort of came through different clubs. And he was playing for Leeds City under the great Herbert Chapman. Now, I mentioned on here before, Herbert Chapman, probably the architect of the modern Arsenal Football Club and the way they played football. And there's a famous bust of Herbert Chapman in the reception area at the Emirates when you walk in. Used to be in the same at Highbury. And Chapman was a Kiverton Park lad, or Kiverton Bridge to be precise. Two brothers, Harry Chapman played for Sheffield Wednesday, and Herbert Chapman played amongst other clubs for Sheffield United. Harry was the better player. He won the league championship of the FA Cup with our neighbours across the road. But he sort of drifted Herbert a bit and went into management, and at one point was the manager of Leeds City. At the end of the First World War, they got found by the FA of making illegal payments to players, and they were wound up. And I may have mentioned this, but they had an auction for the players, incredible. I think at the Dragon Ore Hotel, or one of the big hotels in Leeds, the Grand or something like that. And you could actually turn up and bid for the players, imagine that. But the goalkeeper at that point, and he won a West Riding's League Championship medal for the reserves with Leeds City, was our friend Charles Sutcliffe, born in the 1890s, 1891. And he ended up at Rotherham County. So two Rotherham clubs merged in the 20s to produce the Rotherham United, the Millers that we know and love today. And he was sort of an okay goalkeeper. Nothing more than that, I think it's said in history books. But he played, I think, 2 seasons consecutive football for Rotherham County, as it was then. And he did okay. And in local football circles, apparently he was well regarded as a steady, if not elaborate goalkeeper, which, let's face it, if you could do that and make 500 league appearances, then you've done okay. We had a bit of a crisis. 1923, we played in the FA Cup semi-final against Bolton. And the keeper we'd had since sort of just before the First World War was a keeper called Harold Goff from Castleford. And Harold Goff had played for England. He'd won the FA Cup with the Blazers in 1915. But he committed the cardinal sin. We had a board of directors who were all strict Methodist teetotalers. And I always like quoting Sir Charles Clegg, the chairman, or one of the chairmen of that era. His favourite mantra was, "No man ever gets lost on a straight road." That's about as Methodist as you can get. But he went against the wishes of the board of directors and he bought a pub back home in Castleford. He probably realised his time as a football player was sort of running out, and he wanted to make sure that he got some form of employment and income when he finished. And the board of directors found out. They had Goff, blade-minded, played for England, played in the FA Cup. They had him down for breach of contract and sacked him. Imagine that happening today. But sack him they did, and we went through a sort of succession of keepers. We had another keeper called Ernest Blackwell, and Blackwell was apparently pretty good, but he got injured, badly injured, and finished his football career. He was also a Methodist lay preacher, Ernest Blackwell. And sort of 23, they played in the semi-final, as we say. The team was in the top flight of football. They were looking around for a replacement, and they signed Charlie Sutcliffe. Well, that time was well in his 30s. And I think I'm right in saying on the United registration, John Nicholson didn't fill his age in. He was a bit embarrassed that we'd not brought a younger player in. And as I say, even the teammates, you sort of read reports at that time. So they said he was a bit jittery, very, very nervous before games, and this I do like. John Nicholson used to let him smoke his pipe before he went on the pitch to calm his nerves. Can you imagine that? Mr. Chumley Warner puffing away on a briar at the side of the pitch. But he was good enough to play in a very successful United team, possibly by default, but sometimes that's what happens. If you remember Les Sealey at Manchester United some years ago now, Alex Ferguson desperate for a keeper, and he signed Les Sealey, who's sadly no longer with us, and Sealey was nothing more than a stopgap, but went on and played in a final for Man U and did really, really well. Might have even played in Europe. But United got to the FA Cup semi-finals in 1925, and ultimately the final. And the semi-final that year, always say this, most people, if you're a blade and you're a bit of an anorite like me, will remember where finals were played and who they were against, but test people with semi-finals, it's a little bit more difficult. We played in more than you think. But 1924-25 season semi-final was played at Stamford Bridge in London, home of Chelsea, and our opponents were Southampton. Okay, and an unremarkable game. Sheffield United played in all red in that game. And Sutcliffe did okay in that game, okay enough for somebody regarded as a sort of steady, if nothing more, keeper, but he saved a penalty in the final, which ultimately played a huge part in carrying the Blades through to their first ever Wembley final. Don't forget, Wembley only opened in 1923. And our opponents were quite famously Cardiff City, April the 25th, 1925. Now, kept his place for that. And of course, as history books show, we won the game 1-0. So left the FA Cup for what's so far the last time in our history, though there's plenty of time for another one. No pressure, Chris. But yeah, got a cup winners medal. And he didn't really play that many games after that. We brought another keeper in, and another keeper, and he sort of drifted down the ranks, and eventually he left. I think in a few years spent with us, he probably only played 55, 56 games for us. But in those 55, 56 games, a winner's medal, which is still regarded as one of the holy grails of football. Now, when he finished playing football, he finished in Bradford. And he lived in Bradford till the day he died, up near the golf course there. And he had a textiles business. But I met his grandson, quite by accident. His grandson was lovely. Ian, his grandson, was called. And he lived just up on the Humber, not far from Immingham. And I went up a couple of times for coffee with him, got loads of pictures and some great stuff. But he told me some fantastic stories. Now, the first one, he really shouldn't have played for Sheffield United at all. In fact, after 1912 it was lucky he had any to do anything. And there was a good reason for that. He decided in 1912 that it'd be great to have a new start. So with Mrs. Sutcliffe, they decided to move to America. And in those days, no Concorde or planes and so on. So Mr. Charles Sutcliffe Esquire bought tickets for the transatlantic crossing of Titanic. So Charlie Sutcliffe and his wife should have been on the Titanic when it hit the iceberg and drifted to the bottom of the oceans. He got pneumonia and couldn't travel, and that must be the only time I've ever heard of people getting double pneumonia and thinking, you lucky so-and-so. I wish he got the tickets. Can you imagine what 2 unused Titanic maiden voyage tickets would have been worth now? And can you imagine what Charlie Sutcliffe thought the morning after it happened and he's reading the paper, Titanic sinks, colossal loss of life. So he got away a bit with that one. Now in his collection of stuff, he hadn't got a winner's medal. And sometimes they get lost. You wouldn't think you would lose it, but stolen, anything can happen. And there's a story to it. When the Second World War kicked off, he was too old to enlist in the army. Obviously, he was probably in his 50s by then. And he decided to help out the war effort by getting I suppose you'd call it a job. He volunteered for filling sandbags. So the sandbags that they used to pile up for machine gun fire to deaden that, or I suppose the sort of ones you see at people put up for floods these days in York and stuff like that. He got a job filling sandbags up in Bradford. Now, all the cup winning team, if you ever see any photographs of them, because they met up in later years, there's a great photograph taken 25 years after winning the FA Cup, so in 1950. And they're all in a hotel in Sheffield together for a dinner, and then they're presented at the match the following day on the pitch at Bramall Lane. And 2 things strike you. One, every one of them has got the FA Cup winners' medals on the pocket watches. And Sheffield United's board of directors give each of the players a beautiful 18-karat gold Hunter pocket watch. And when you pop it open, it commemorates inside, in beautiful engraving, Sheffield United Football Club, English Cup winners, April 25th, 1925, from the board of directors. The gorgeous things with the player's name on it. And every one of them wore these on an Albert chain with the Cup winners medal. And you can see these old boys, and they look old, let me tell you, all sort of sat in wicker chairs at some hotel in Sheffield, probably the Grand, and they've got the Cup winners medals and pocket watches on. The second thing that strikes you is how old they look. Now, some of them probably only be 50, so younger than me, and yet they look old men. They all got cardigans on and pipes, and they just look old long before their time. But Sutcliffe were bagging sand for the war effort with his Cup winners medal on his pocket watch, and at some point bagging the sand, his pocket watch got lost. So that means that somewhere in 1944, in a bag of sand, whether it was used in Bradford, Leeds, or shipped over to France, I don't know what they did with bags of sand, but somewhere in one of those bags of sand, thousands of bags of sand they must have bagged, was a Sheffield United 1925 FA Cup winners medal awarded to Charlie Sutcliffe. Incredible, isn't it? So that's a player who played not for Rotherham United per se, but the old Rotherham County before the 2 Rotherham sides amalgamated in the 20s to form the Millers that we know today. And I picked on that because I think he probably shouldn't have been around. He should have been on the Titanic, which is pretty sobering stuff. And be a player that was regarded as nothing more than, not being unkind but unspectacular perhaps, just steady, was good enough to save a penalty in a crucial game and then go on and win an FA Cup in the biggest game that the clubs used to have in the season back then. So that's a bit about the Millers, a bit about the late, great Charlie Sutcliffe, died in the early 1960s in Bradford. A bit about a few of the connections between the Millers and the Blades. And a 12:15 kick-off tomorrow. We hope you enjoy the game. Have a great weekend.